This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, everyone. It's the 21st of October, 2024. I'm Patricia Yarrow, the founder of Informasia, and as I like to say, for everything, including incorrect dates, I'm to blame. All right. Our Today we are going to have a great walking tour about the Nakasendo Road, getting in touch with Japanese history with John Tofflemire, who is a neighbor of mine here in Eastern Tokyo. Let me read a little bit about him. During the pandemic, John began an Instagram account which focused on architectural photography of vintage Japanese buildings. Within 2 years, John's account had attracted more than 30,000 followers. Hmm. As part of his Instagram activities, John walked from Tokyo to Kyoto, a distance of more than 500 kilometers, along the historical Nakasendo Trail in both 2022 and 2023. John has also traveled extensively after the end of the pandemic, particularly to Southeast Asia, where he did further architectural photography of major cities in the region. And with that, I think I've forgotten something. Yes, I did. I did forget something. His earlier background. John earned his bachelor degree in urban geography at the University of Washington in 1984. After he received his PhD in urban economics from the University of Pennsylvania in 1992, he was recruited to Japan by Mitsubishi Research Institute in Tokyo. In short, John consulted with international clients in virtually every major Japanese real estate market sector throughout Japan, hence his interest in buildings. He taught economics at Aoyama Gakuin University in Tokyo from 2015 to 2018. Then, during the pandemic, he began his Instagram account and post-pandemic traveled to Southeast Asia. Okay, with that, let's lace up our hiking boots and welcome our trail guide, Mr. John Tofflemire. Please.
Patricia, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And yeah, as you mentioned, I walked the Nakasendo from Tokyo to Kyoto. I did it twice, and in the process, by the second time, and I realized that I was feeling that you could feel the history of Japan. I realized
Mm,
that I'm walking through the environment. Of course, my urban walks, you feel the history of a place, an urban place. But as I walked through the Nakasendo, I began really feeling Japanese history, and there's so much of modern Japanese history, and I say modern from 1600, that is present along the route. And so what I'm going to focus on today is a portion of the route in Saitama prefecture. So a little portion of that. There's lots more. I've took in the two times I've done it, probably took 7, 8,000, maybe even 10,000 photos along the way. So a lot of photography. All the photography here, except I'll make some point out where it's not, but these are photos that I took along the way from Tokyo to Kyoto. And I'll begin with an introduction. Is it possible? I need to. Okay, there we go. Uh, so the Nakasendo was as the Tokugawa shogunate came to power, they needed people to travel from Kyoto, the capital in Kyoto, to Edo. And the two major routes were the Nakasendo and the Tokaido. The Nakasendo literally means interior mountain road. And it's because it's interior route, it passes through about half the route is between 700 and 1,600 meters in elevation. This is a map of the major routes that existed, the roads that existed between Edo and Kyoto, the Nakasendo in red, the Tokaido in blue. And this is a map that I did that shows those yellow are the stations, the juku along the way, and these are the names of the old of the old Edo era prefectures, and we will focus on the ones that are in Musashi prefecture, and which are that is now, and much of that is now Saitama prefecture. Now the apparently one of the reasons why it was considered less risky. The interior, apparently there was less. It was considered there was less risk of theft. They had better. There was better the better control. The Nakasendo 69 stations. Each one were basically small towns that could establish a service the needs of travelers. More than a few had brothels and prostitution. Some others were family friendly. Uh, the One of the important things that happened in the Nakasendo was it seeded a number of towns along the way. A number of towns. Gifu is one along there. Sekigahara, Nagatsukawa in Gifu, Kuruizawa is Saku, Kuruizawa are other examples. But where we're going to focus on here are the ones in Saitama prefecture, and from Warabi to Honjo. And those are the ones that I'm going to focus on in this presentation. But before I do that, I'm going to step back and show you some of the beyond where I'm going to talk about today, just to give you a sense of what you can see along the Nakasendo. This is a view near Yokokawa, just before you go up over the mountains of the Usui Pass to Karuizawa. This is south of this is the top of the Kiso Valley. I saw this lovely kuda, and this is a little side story. That gentleman, that was an 86-year-old man that I met. He was going to walk 90 kilometers along the route, all the way down the Kiso Valley. One very slow step at a time. Amazing, amazing man. But when I was taking that photo and he came by and he started talking to me, and I eventually had more conversation with him. Very, very fascinating person. This is down in the Kiso Valley. This is Akamatsu near there, but that is the Kiso River, and some portion, much of the river in that area is completely untamed. There's some really lovely, and both times when I did it, and especially the first time in 2022, it was absolutely fantastic color. It was the peak of the flowering, the blossoms. I had 10 days in a row. It was one of the wonderful visual experiences of my life, seeing that color for 10 days, day after day, of this kind of color. It was just absolutely fantastic. Uh, Here is a picture from the Tsumago Juku. This was one of the most remote sites, and because it was so remote, after the Meiji Restoration, when the Nakasendo fell into disuse and was basically abandoned and forgotten, these were a place. This was one of the places that was so out of the way that nobody bothered to tear it down, and much of it remains preserved to this day. This is in Nagatsukawa Juku, just south of the Kiso Valley. I suspect that's an Edo era kuda, but that's been converted into a coffee shop there. But that's in the Juku Nagatsukawa. This is west of Gifu. This is the Abashi House west of Gifu. This should be a late 19th century. Some parts of this are Edo era, but a magnificent, huge, complex, magnificent. You see stuff like this along the way. These just magnificent, magnificent buildings. This is in the Tsuruijuku, again, west of Gifu. And I suspect these are Edo. My guess is these are Edo era structures. Getting closer to Kyoto is this was a you'll see more of these traditional thatched roofs, and this particular one was a resting place for an Edo era general. One or two others are actually actively used as residences today that you see right along the Nakasendo. Now, and then the next one I'm going to show you, it's right at the end of the official end of the Nakasento in uh, uh, Kutsu, not Kumatsu. Anyway, and at the end of it, the end of a rainbow, you have a pot of gold, and at the end of the Nakasendo, you have the Paradise Bar or the Gokuraku Sakaba. And that is this is actually a Meiji era building, and at the end they have this very, very Japanese humor. I just love when I saw this. You just like fall down laughing. And it's like I say, right at the end of Kusatsu. I'm sorry, it's a Kusatsu, which is the city where the Nakasendo joins up with the Tokaido to continue for the last stretch to Kyoto. Now excuse me. Now I'm going to show you in Tokyo a few examples of buildings either along the Nakasendo or near the Nakasendo that you can see if you live in Tokyo. It's very available. This is the Kanda Matsuya. This was built right after the earthquake, but it's a Taisho era building just off of the Nakasendo route. Here's a lovely, the Matsumoto House this is west of Kanda Station. This is a 1931 era. This is uh, 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 was constructed by a vegetable wholesaler in business since the Edo era. This site was the old site of the Tokyo vegetable market. They must have been a very prominent business people in that market at that time. This is a preserved building. This is a national registered building. And then up the first Juku as you leave from Nihonbashi is Itabashi Juku up in Itabashi. And this is the Itago Kome building. It was constructed in 1914, and you can see it's brick. And the interesting thing there, 1914 building, clearly it survived a brick building not far from central Tokyo, but survived quite well the 1923 earthquake. Very recently registered as a cultural property. There's one or two other Meiji era buildings that you can see near the Itabashi Juku. Now I'm going to turn my attention to where I'm going to spend the rest of my talk, the Nakasendo in Saitama Prefecture. And I'm going to focus, there are a number of Juku of the Nakasendo in Saitama Prefecture. I'm not going to go through every one. I'm going to focus on the ones that you can go to and see buildings. You can see things that are interesting. Not many. There's only a handful of Edo era buildings, but these are places that you can go, and the exception of Kumagai, and I'll explain why that's there. But these other 5 places are you can go there and feel some of the history of these places. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about the history. Being an economist, a regional economist, I'm going to talk about some of the economic, in some of these cases, the economic drivers of these places, why these places existed in the first place, and that's certainly an important part. What these places did in the Edo era, Not only were they places where people stayed, but places that also produced things. And I'm going to start with Warabi-juku. Now, the numbers here, uh, numbers tell a story, and I consider myself an analyst, and so these numbers tell a story. I'm going to try to use these numbers to help tell the story of these places. The one on the left, the first number, that 2,223, is the population of the Juku in 1843. The shogun ordered a census to be taken of all of the Juku along the Nakasendo in 1843, and that was the population of that. And you will compare that with these other places as we go north to Honjo. The one that you want to focus on right now that's important on the right, that's what's called the Hatago. Those were the ordinary inns that existed in Warabi at that time. Now, Warabi is not far from not far from Tokyo, and the artist Eisen Keisai, between 1835 and 1837, painted for each Juku. Each Juku, he painted images from each area. And one of the interesting things is when before I did put together this presentation, uh, I just thought of these as just paintings, and I didn't pay much attention. And one of the nice things in putting together this presentation was it really I had to look at each picture, and I realized it really there's a deep connection that in many cases that each of these has the landscape, what was going on. There's some important things. And this one is called the Toda River Crossing. And I assure you, at this site, which now on the other side of the river, on the left side here, that's basically now the Arakawa. Huge river, huge, actually a flood channel now. This is one of the things you realize when I think about what the landscape there is now, how just the transformation that's been made, that Japan has made of its landscape in the Tokyo region in the modern era. But the Toda River crossing was used. There was a ferry, and this is the ferry. There was no ferry at night, and there was no ferry at night. It was considered dangerous. And so because of that, if you were coming south and approaching Edo, and if you came too late, you basically had to stop the night, which probably was good for business in Warabi. Now, if you're not familiar with Warabi, it's a small town, but uh, it's actually the smallest municipality in Japan. It's only 5 square kilometers, but it's a very distinct place. And you think outside of Tokyo and Saitama Prefecture that it's just going to be suburbia. This is a real town, and it's a town with centuries of history. Basically, it was settled in the 12th century. When you walk around this town, it feels like a town. It really has a place and a feeling as a town. And so it's about 25 kilometers from Nihonbashi. And so a fairly natural place to set one up. And because of the town, the distance, apparently it was done in 1612. The Nakasendo itself established about 1602. Many of the Juku were set up right away. This one was a little bit later. Now, as I mentioned, the types of dwellings, there are 3 types of dwellings: the honjin, waki-honjin, and hatago. And I'll just briefly discuss each of those. The honjin were lodging facilities that hosted high-ranking officials, daimyo, shogun, other people. Ordinary people rarely allowed to stay in honjin. because of the practice of Sankin Kotai and other events, large numbers of ranking people were traveling. Sometimes you had huge processions of people. There are historical instances of thousands of people uh, 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 traveling along the route. So because of this, for high-ranking people, at times the honjin were inadequate, so they had waki honjin that could for that spillover for the high, so the high ranking people could have some place to stay. But in the times where they weren't serving guests, high-ranking guests, ordinary travelers could stay there. And then for the ordinary people, the hatago were lodging facilities and in many cases these serve food to guests, and I would say it's like the modern ryokan, very much like the modern ryokan. Guests were provided dinner and breakfast, and some cases provided lunch, bento box. And I experienced when I was walking on the route a place that it did exactly ryokan. I stayed overnight in the mountains that did exactly that, where they provided a lunch bento box when I headed out for one of the major passes when I was walking the route. So those are the three major types of. Not when there were huge numbers of people, then they stayed in the houses themselves. So those houses were there probably in case of an emergency. One of the interesting things about the Warabi Juku was it had a moat surrounded it. And this is an image taken from a map along the Juku, and you can see that's a part of it. They actually had a moat that went around it. Clearly, it's not there now. And they actually had drawbridges at each end, so they closed it up at night. One of the interesting little things about it. Now I'm going to show you some photos from the Warabi Juku. This is at the entrance to the Juku. Very nice sign that you can see you're coming into it. This is the Kuramoto Nakatsu. This is you can tell this is a Meiji era style. This is very distinct prop in the style in this style, probably the 1870s, 1880s. This particular business has been there for more than 100 years. I think it would date from the late Meiji era that they were at this location, this business. This is another house along the route in the Warabi Juku, an old merchant's home. Here is a business. This was the Suzuki family building. Now it's an older style, but it was constructed in 1931, and the family operated a pharmacy here in the 1880s. Obviously, they built this building during that time. Excuse me, until the 2010s. Then they converted it to an art gallery. So it is at present an art gallery that is managed by the fourth generation family member. And you'll see these kinds of old families that live there. This is Takizawa family home. Again, this is very early Meiji era style, and this dates from at least 1876. Now you can see the building attached to it. A lot of these buildings in the Edo era, they would have ran a business in this here along with the home, and then they had the storage, and this building is thought to date from the late Edo era. That is basically your late Edo era style kura that you'll see along the Nakasendo route. And here's a short video so you can see them go together there. And I've got another one along just at the uh, just outside the traditional Nakasendo, but still some very interesting buildings that you can see. The Yoshino family home. This one, oh, sorry, let me take that back. Need to. The Yoshino family home, 1935. And again, older style. They ran a business on the ground floor, the residence in the upper floor. And then the next one, the Muramatsu family home. And again, you see these older kura Lovely, lovely. That's that volcanic stone. It's 1911, and you can see right at the end of the Meiji era, so it's a little bit larger. And you see a photo of it. This family home, it was finished in 1911. There were lots of people walking along the route. Japanese people love to explore it. Now, what's interesting about this, the Munamatsu family member living here is the eighth generation. So these are people this is way back in the Edo era, and there are families that are still living there that would have done business during the Edo era. So there's that connection, these old families that still live there. Now we're going to move to Okigawa. Now there's some other juke along the route, uh, 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 Urawa, uh, um, uh, O- uh, Omiya, Ageo. There's not much to see. You go to these places, there's just not that much to see. Okigawa there's definitely a lot to see here. And what makes it interesting is that it's 40 kilometers from Nihonbashi. That was considered a day's walk in the Edo era. You can see less population, but more Hatago. So a little bit more active in terms of the Hatago than Warabi, which was not many people would have. They would have only people that were going to Edo that would have stopped there. But this was a good place to stop on the way up coming from Edo. And we'll see a little bit later, there's a little bit of a strategic location in a kind of interesting way that we'll talk a little bit more about later. This is the Ace and Keisai uh, uh, from painting for Okigawa Juku, and it's called Wilderness Scenery. Very rural feel. And you can see this place very rural. There's no sense of any juku. This is a woman that's bundling. It looks like wheat, and somebody stopping along there. But the feeling and this place was very rural in the Edo era. Uh, and in fact, uh, it was an important center for the production and distribution of safflower. And the thing that drove the Okigawa economy during the Edo era was the growing of safflower in the area. And one of the things I learned, my Japanese is far less than I think most of the people here. But I learned the word for safflower here, Benihana. So, but this was the most important cash crop in the area. It appears that the most important primary use was dyeing fabric and other materials. Now, Warabi also had a fair amount of in the late Edo era did textile manufacturing. So dyeing fabric and other materials. This was the second major output of safflower during the Edo era. There was a place in northern Tohoku that was the leading area, but apparently the Okigawa had some advantages because it was warmer. You could get harvested earlier. Because the price of safflower very high, it doesn't appear they produced much rice there. It was so attractive, and we'll see there's still signs today of the wealth that was created during the Edo era by this. And I'll also note that the substitution of chemical dyes uh, caused that to the safflower production in the area to decline rapidly at the end of the Edo after the Edo era. Here's this to give you a feel for what this place was in the early Edo era. This was drawn around 1700. This is the Okigawa Juku right in the center of the photo there. You can see all the buildings in the map, and then the there's a wooden entrance.
Why are you watching non-Catella before, Buchan?
Hello? Sorry. Um, so there is the wooden entrance gate visible there, but you can see a very rural area. It's all just country, the roads, but this is all just countryside. This is an example. The Okigawa Juku. There was a the shogun uh, uh, had a 91 volume set of maps of major traveling routes that was done, and this was the one that was done for Okigawa. This is what it looked like in about 1800. Now, this is the Okigawa Honjin. I didn't take this photo, just to let you know. I didn't take this photo, but very few Honjin survived. And probably the regime, at the end of the Edo era, the regime wasn't popular. Most of these were destroyed in the early Edo era. Okigawa is one of the ones that have survived, but that is it. It's not in the Juku, at least this one. It's not right at the Juku, but this building is right along Okigawa, the Okigawa Juku, the Yabe residence. This is a kuda on the upper floor, constructed in 1905. A kuda on the upper floor, the residence on the lower floor. This was the sixth generation when they did this. They were a safflower wholesaler. You can see they were showing the wealth that they earned during the Edo era that they made. This very opulent kind of building. It's very impressive to see this. But that was a sixth generation head, so that would have gone back to about say early 18th century. So early mid Edo era that the family was there and in the safflower business. Across the street from there, and these are all near Okigawa Station in the Juku, the Kobayashi Ryokan. Again, this is a late Edo era hatago that has survived, and one other hatago has survived there, and this is the Takemura Ryokan, which actually still is in business. It's an operating business. A part of this, not all of the building, but a part of this building is late Edo era. There's another business. This is the Shimamura tea shop. It was founded in 1854. This is early 20th century, but the business has been here since the Edo era. And this fascinating photo. This is 1907, and you can see the Yabe residence right there on the left side, and then the Hatago right across the street. So those buildings are still in existence. The other Takemura is down the street there. I don't think you can see it in this photo. Then we move to Konosujuku, a little ways up the road. Again a little bit larger, about the same population as Warabijuku, but now we're getting a little bit further away. We've got a larger, more inns, more hatago there. What Konosu is famous for is the Hina dolls, which we'll talk about briefly, or just a little bit. It says the distant view of Mount Fukiage, and I'm wondering because I think this is Asamayama. So I think that's what that mountain is. That I don't think they call it Fukiage now. Konosu was basically founded right. Apparently, the Tokugawa Ieyasu used near the area. He was conducting falcon hunts in 1593. May have affected the establishment of the Juku at that location. Mentioned the famous Konosu Hina dolls that began manufacturing during the early Edo era. And you can see that celebrates the city's history in manufacturing Hina dolls, the Konosu City Industrial Tourism Center. And it's said to still produce as much as 40% of the Hina dolls. And this is part of a complex constructed during the late Meiji era. And now I've got a video of the complex. It's really lovely. They just really have done it very, very well. It's just a beautiful little place. Well, very well preserved Meiji era warehouses. The museum is right there on the right side there. And here are some examples of the Hina dolls that they have. This is not my photo. My apologies for that. But that's an example of the Hina dolls. There is still a number, because there's a fair amount of manufacturing still of these dolls there. There's a lot of wholesale and retailing of the dolls in the town. It's still an important part of the local economy. Here's some buildings in there in the Juku, Konosu Juku. Here's one, the Kimura Lumber Company. This is an interesting building. The company was founded in 1905. Now the site was the site of the Honjin in the Konosu Juku. So it has a historical importance. I suspect, my guess is that this building may date from the founding of the company. It's definitely a late Meiji, has that late Meiji era feeling. I said, especially this first building in the front there. I suspect is a late Meiji era building. Then a more historical building. This is an early Meiji era building, the Kimura family home. It was constructed in 1879. And then there's a kuda next to it. I didn't have a photo of that. This is from Google Maps. That's probably Edo era. This is a kind of typical, you'll see the complex, we saw it earlier, of a family running a business and with their kuda. That's the kind of that would have been attached to. So you see this, a kind of common thing that you would have seen along the route. This probably was quite common during the Edo era. And so this a little bit after, still continuing that tradition here in the early Meiji era. Now, across the street from that, I took this photo, this old kuda there. That the first time I walked through, they were having a cosplay convention. So it was kind of interesting. People walking around in cosplay. I couldn't, so I snapped that to give it a little bit of color to the town and to this photo. I'm going to briefly talk about Kumagaya. Now Kumagaya, now the interesting thing you'll note, it was a significant town, over 3,000 population. But the thing that you'll note is that there are only 19 hatago, and we'll find out exactly why in just a little bit. But there were only 19 hatago there. Now, sadly, there's really nothing to see. I mention this because it's part of the story to talk about Kumagai. Of course, it's a major city now in the area. But in order to tell the full story, I've had to include this. But one of the things that you can see here is this is a view from the Eisen Keisai. And this view talks about a fellow. There was a Hirai Gonpachi, and this was a famous site here. Actually, this doesn't talk about it, but at this location, you'll see this Jizo statue right there. And I'm going to have the next one shows a photo. That's not the original. That's a replica. The original you can find in a museum nearby at this location on this link here. The original Jizo statue dates from 1699. It's thought to be the oldest one in Saitama Prefecture. But the story is that this Hirai Gonpachi, he had committed a couple of murders, one that was nearby here at this location, and he stops by, sees the statue, feels guilty, and there's a conversation that supposedly took place between them. But apparently it's a well-known story. The interesting thing here is you'll see that's the same direction. you'll see the embankment there. That's the embankment there in the painting there. Now, the reason why that Kumagaya had very few hatago is that the local ruling clan forbade prostitution. They didn't allow prostitution, so there wasn't any entertainment. Now, as I mentioned, sadly, much of the Kumagaya-juku was destroyed in the aerial bombing raid. It was the last day of the war, the day before the surrender. It's a tragic. To me, it's a tragic story. It was the what was existed there. Then most of it was destroyed in the bombing. It killed about 250 people. Just a really sad a sad thing. But as I say, the main thing there. That's why they only had 19 hatago. Now, this lovely building is along the Nakasendo. It's about 5 kilometers north of Kumagaya. And I actually don't know anything about this building. This is one of those curious things. Sometimes you run into this kind of thing. It looks like it probably late Edo era, the early Meiji era building, magnificent structure. And I can't find any reference to it. But if you walk along, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. You have to be walking along the route to see it, but there it is, and beautiful, beautiful building. Now I'm going to talk about Fukaya-juku. And Fukaya, now you'll see the interesting thing here in this, you'll see the population is very small. It's only 1,928, much smaller than Kumagaya, but it has 80 hatago. It says 80 hatago. And you'll ask, well, why? Why did it have all those, not so much of a population? And also, you'll also note that it had 4 wakihonjin. So places for people to stay. And the reason is that there was a party basically, and the interesting thing is it's about 76, 77 kilometers from Nihonbashi. It's a 2-day walk. So if you make it to Okegawa, that 40 kilometers, then you have another day's walk, and you're going to blow past Kumagaya, because when you get to Fukaya, that's where the party was. And you can see here they have the ladies of the night on the street. This is the only one of these along these juke where there's any street scene, and it really tells you what was going on there. You can see the women here. There's the men. You can see the one man smoking there, just kind of hanging out in the night there. Party town. This was Disneyland for these people. Their second day out on their trip heading for Kyoto. One of the very important things about this this town that's very important to our discussion, it was the birthplace of Shibusawa Eiichi in 1840. And so a hugely important figure in Japan history of the transformation of the Japanese economy, the transformation of Japan to a modern industrial nation. Perhaps you know a lot about him. I won't spend much time. We don't have a lot of time, but he travels to France as a shogunate representative. So he sees France, he sees the world, he sees Europe, and he's very impressed. And he comes back and he helps huge transformation of Japan. He established the Japan's first bank, which today is the Mizuho Bank. It's said that he founded 500 companies, hundreds of industrial startups during his career. Now, for our story, among the companies that he helped found was the Japan Brick Manufacturing Company, the Nihon Renga Seizo, which he helped establish in his hometown of Fukaya in 1888. And if you're familiar with Tokyo, everybody has seen Fukaya brick. And that's because here's examples of buildings made in using Japan brick, manufacturing company brick. These were made in Fukaya. And the first one here, now these three photos, I didn't take these. The one on the lower left, I did. This is the Mansei Bashi Station. This is about 2 kilometers north of Nihonbashi. This is actually on Route 17. The bridge is Route 17, which is the Nakasendo. If you're not familiar with that, Route 17 going going north, that's Chuodori, going through that part of the city, going north of Nihonbashi. That is the Nakasendo. So that is on the Nakasendo. The interesting thing is these are all, in fact, have some association with the Nakasendo. That's Tokyo Station. Those are Fukaya brick. Tokyo University, again, Tokyo Daigaku Todai. It is those were made using Japan brick manufacturing. That is the Hongo Dori, in front of the university. That is the Nakasendo. In case you're not aware of that, that is the Nakasendo. Finally, the Utsui Railway Terminal in Yokokawa, that you're going up over the Usui Pass. It's an old railway that doesn't exist anymore. The rail station is still there and preserved. Now turning back to Fukaya, you go up to Fukaya and you've got some beautiful, beautiful brick that you can see. This gorgeous Fukaya brick, probably turn of the 20th century, 1890s, 1900 building. I just love this to see these kura that are made out of this brick. I personally, it's one of my favorites when I see kura made out of this brick. Excuse me. This is one that's not in the Juku. It's not in Fukai. It's just north. But when you walk just outside along the Nakasendo Road, just outside, this is a building with so much personality. I just love it just feels like it's alive. This is that Japanese sense where they animate this building. And that's the thing when I saw this, it just looks like it's from, like it's ready to come to life and start talking to you. But again, this Fukaya brick, this is in the Juku, right in the middle of the Fukaya Juku. This gorgeous, gorgeous building. It was the Tsukamoto Fuel Company building, constructed in 1912, right at the end of the Meiji era. You see these are called the usatsu, these sleeves, and no, they weren't invented at this time. They date from the Edo era, but the use of the brick. They use the brick here, and it's just lovely, lovely building. It's if you go to Fukai, you've got to see this building. But this use of the usatsu, you'll see this along the Nakasendo, especially further south. You'll see examples of from Edo era buildings that use this usatsu, both very decorative, but also for fire protection. Now I'm going to show you the manufacturing plant this is a short video of that. And we will see the brick smokestack. Here's the manufacturing plant, the brick smokestack. It's all still there. It's preserved as a historical site, and some Greek statue. Now, one of the things that you'll see here, and I'll just very briefly, this is the Otani Fujitoyo house. This was a merchant family who'd been active in the Fukaya Juku since the mid-Edo era. It was constructed in the 1930s. It was a mayor at the time, but an old family. And so you walk along and you see it's fascinating, very unique building that you'll see in Fukaya along the Juku. This is a Shibusawa home. This is not my photo, but this is the Shibusawa home. in Fukaya. This one I did take. Oh, sorry, let me get back. That's important because it's part of the story. And this is the former Nanatsu Ume sake brewery site, and you can see the Nanatsu Ume from right to left there. Now, what's interesting here is this brewery was founded in 1694. It was by an Omi that was near Kyoto merchant. So he comes up all the way up from near Kyoto to Fukaya. And you think, well, why would he do that? And it was one of the most famous sake brewers during the Edo era. They apparently won numerous medals during the Edo era for quality in sake. And of course, it was a party town. You've got you've got all the brothels, the prostitution, you've got the bars, and you've got great sake to drink. It must have been absolutely, they turned it into a destination. The brewery, it lasted for more than 300 years, and it only closed in 2004, but it is preserved. Here's an example of a juku, probably Edo era juku. I'm sorry, Edo era kura in the Fukaya juku. That's another building in the juku. You can see the Shibusawa, his photo. You see his photo everywhere in Fukaya. Now I'm going to show you just a feel. Here is along the Juku in Fukaya. Just a sweep there. I've got a little bit of glare. Apologies for that. And there's the you can see the chimney there, the brick, the manufacturing chimney. I want to mention this is the Ito Jusetsu construction company. It's not in the Juku, but this was founded by some young people, 2018, and their business is renovate older buildings. And one of the things that I found in both Fukaya and in Honjo, as we'll see in just a moment, a real interest in preserving their history, a real interest in historical preservation that actually is quite advanced in Honjo. But and if one or two, if you there's some people here that know my Instagram channel. I had that on my Instagram, posted that on Instagram. The people that in the company they dropped me a line. They were so happy to have had their business posted, and for them these are young people preserving their historical heritage. So kudos to them. And now we're going to turn to the Honjo Juku, and you can see this actually was had the most population of any Juku in the entire Nakasendo in 1843. It was a major town, and we'll see you can see it had 70 hatago at that time, so it was a significant center in its own right. Obviously, not everybody stopped at Fukaya to party, and this is the Kananagawa ferry. The Juku is right there. This would have been the ferry to go to what is now Gunma prefecture. So to over the river and then into what's now Gunma prefecture. Now, one of the prominent families ran this ferry. You can see the ferry there, and they operated it as a free ferry. We'll talk a little bit about that family in just a moment. Now, the interesting thing that I found out in doing my research, the name Honjo comes from a warlord family that ruled for hundreds of years. They ruled the area, but the family in the castle was overthrown in 1580. But the name stuck, which is quite interesting. But what I'm going to spend more time talking about is the Toya Hanbei family. And this is where you have you see these instances of these prominent families. This family was a wealthy merchant. They had a big business in Hangzhou that dealt in what were called so-called rough items, or the automono, household items, daily necessities, not a socially prominent kind of thing, but you could make money. These people were making a lot of money. They also had the family established 5 stores in Edo. They had a store in Kyoto in addition to their Hangzhou store. They had a lot of employees. Um, Now, one of the things that happened to the family, third generation, that would have probably been mid Edo era. They opened a money exchange business in Edo that led funds to daimyo. This caused one of the things you see this where warlords, daimyo, kings in Europe, this kind of where banks or money lenders lending money to them, and they fight war, they start wars, and but they couldn't pay. A daimyo couldn't pay, and the family they lost their fortune, bankrupted the family in the late Edo era. But they did experience recovering their fortunes in the Meiji era, and they're still around. This family is still around in Hangzhou.
Okay,
You,
Michael, we're at 8 o'clock right now, just so you know.
yes, and I should have no trouble finishing up.
No problem.
So this is a building you can see. This is not in the Juku, but very similar to the one that we saw in Fukaya. This is the Omasa Shoten. And then the next building I'm going to show you, and it's right, I took that right there at that gate, and you can see the Usatsu there. That's a lovely building. But that is the Atsumi Tsushin. And I mentioned that because this is actually a global company. It's a global company that deals in security cameras. And apparently this is their headquarters. That lovely brick building there, probably around 1900 Meiji era building, that is still apparent because on their website that lists it as their headquarters. This is a global business. You run into this kind of thing in Japan. It's quite fascinating. Um, lots of stuff to see in Hangzhou. Lots of stuff. This is a Edo era Kura. It was apparently used as a stationary store by Maruju Shoten. I believe they're still in business, but it's still apparently it's still in use. This Edo era building is still actively in use. A lovely build, just wonderful building. This is Fukaya Brick in Hangzhou. This was the Hangzhou Commercial Bank warehouse. In its story, they built it in 1896 in order to store silk cocoons as collateral for loans. Very interesting story. And because Hangzhou was said to be a leading center of silk production in Japan at the time. So they built this warehouse to store silk cocoons. It's had other uses, but as part of this city's very active commitment to historical preservation, the Hangzhou city purchased the building in 2010. They completed renovation in 2017, and they used it for exhibition space as a performance hall. So this is a town really committed to preserving their history. And we will see. And before we get to more of that, but this is right along the Juku. I love this building. It was constructed in 1916, the Nakanoya Noodle Factory. I mention this not only because it's a gorgeous building, but it's currently run the sixth generation of owners of this business, 6 generations. And they originally, the Nakanoya name is the original name. And the reason they used that for a couple hundred years, it's now called Noguchi because that's the family name. But Nakanoya, they used it because the first generation owner of this business was originally an employee at the Toyohanbe's 18th century shop. So this is that kind of connection. And it turns out that the Toya family home is just right behind this building. I think it's just to the right, and behind this building is where the current family members, current generation of these Toya family members live. Another couple images, just you can see that lace screen. Just a beautiful. I love this building. Really like it. And if you're in Honjo, stop by. You can get a soba there. This is an example. This is a cha shop, tea shop. I think this is a Meiji era building, and if you're familiar with my Instagram channel, you've seen this building on my. This building got 300,000 views when I posted. It was wildly popular, and it's a gorgeous building, lovely, lovely building right along in the Juku in Honjo. Here's three. I'm going to show you three kura. And again, this is a real example of this town's commitment to historical preservation. Uh, the the first two were constructed by a business called Kokuya. This building was originally black plastered. It was used to store documents, but this one was used by a Kokuya, built in 1889, to store miso and soy sauce. And then those two properties and a third property was taken over by the Komori Shoten, and they're in the sake business. They're still in existence, and they took it over early in the century and then constructed this Fukaya brick building in 1921, where they stored sake there. They left these properties in 2010, but a local group organize themselves to save the properties, to have the properties purchased, and now they're museums. And I've got a little video here just to show you what the two buildings side by side look like. Just gorgeous, gorgeous buildings. And then finally, and this is an important building, to me, I find it fascinating. This was the Honjo police station. It was constructed in 1883. So let's picture this. 15 years after the Meiji Restoration, the new regime, they construct the first Western style public building, the police station. And to me, and if anybody has any comments on this, I would really, be interested and appreciate it. But to me, this says this is a new era. It's a new era of policing, a new way of a new government, a new way of running things. But I find when I saw this, I said, this is one of these things that you see when you walk along the Nakasendo, these things that tell you so much about Japanese history, that Japanese modern history. Um, and as I say, these are the things that when you see these kinds of things, it really, really feel the modern history of Japan. Building is currently used as the Honjo City History and Folklore Museum. So it's still open. You can go and see it for that. That is the last slide. I want to thank you for listening. This is my contact information. This will be available. This is all going to get posted. That's my contact information on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And now it's time for questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, everybody, if you'd like to unmute, please go right ahead. Okay, thank you, John. We do have a few questions. There's also been quite an interesting discussion going on during all of this.
Professor,
What?
architectural artist. Art. What is the profession? Not quite sure.
Okay, hang on, Patrick. Okay, let me get through through these questions here. Early on, David Burley asked, was Karuizawa part of the Nakasendo?
Yes, it is a juku on the Nakasendo.
Okay, and he says he understands it was mostly developed by Westerners as a retreat.
Yes, it was that, but of course that would have been after, yes, after the Edo era, yeah.
Okay.
But it was a Juku. There's really not much there. The Juku is there, but it's kind of more it's kind of more a, a, a theme park now. It kind of feels more like a theme
これ
park.
じゃない？画面共有、シェア。
Okay, so John, could you stop sharing your screen, please?
Sure. Here we go.
Thank you. All right. And then there was a question discussion about from Ian Ruxton, is Juku the alternative reading of Yado? And I think the discussion decided that it was.
Okay, I've seen now there's Shuku and Juku. So sometimes they're called Shuku, sometimes Juku. I think it just has to, it could be local, it could be a local dialect, but usually all of them are either called along the Nakasendo, either called Juku or Shuku. I just use Juku as the term to describe all of them.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Uh, let's see. Then, oh, Lance Gatling asks, or he says, my impression from most of the houses is that there were rows of similar houses. They were not standalone. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. In the Juku, these would have been like towns. So you would have come into them. You felt like you were entering a town. They were very tightly. They were probably they may have shared walls, but they were one after the lined up one after the other on either side. If you go back to the map, for example, the map of Okigawa Juku in around 1700, you can see that if you look carefully at that map, you can see that very clearly how all the buildings and they're standing right next to each other, just one after another, all standing right next to each other. And it's such a contrast there to the kind of rural all around it's rural. So yes, it would have had that real feeling of that you're entering a town.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
and and
after
and,
I
and I'm sorry,
after,
the Tamago Juku, I mean Sumago Juku, is really has that feel of that.
after I typed that question, you put a photo up of early 20th century, one of the towns I forget, and it was very clear from that they're all lined up at
Oh
uniform
yes, yes,
heights
yes. That's
and their roof
Okigawa.
pitch and
Yes,
everything else.
yes, that was the 1907
Mhm.
photo from Okigawa. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Ian Ruxton asked, the Nakasendo was one of the five major
Five.
highways
Yes.
out of
Yes.
Edo.
Yes.
Out of Edo, when were they built?
The Tokaido and the Nakasendo were established right at the beginning. So Tokugawa shogunate takes over right around 1600. They set and then they basically move the center of power to Edo. They keep the capital in Kyoto. They want people to go back and forth. Those were established almost immediately. So 1602 is said to have been the establishment. So they would have gone out and built these roads right away. And many of these juku were set up just almost overnight. A number of these is that you'll see that were established right 1602, 1603. I think both of those routes were set up right in 16 in
何？
between
何違う？
1602 and 1610.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Oh, actually, Ian Ruxton asked, so how did the rulers manage before that? I guess before there were highways.
Uh, you mean the warlords that were ruling?
Right.
Yeah, that's like in Honjo. And there were roads through these areas. There were roads and paths. Honjo, for example, I think there was a major cross road because it goes there were routes that went up to Maebashi, for example, and that went south. So some of this was established along. There was some existing highways. in some cases, at least along some of the route that existed. But I think much of it was just established whole cloth
Oh, thank you.
as a string of towns all along the way. Because I think that's the way, I think the proper way to look at these is they set up 69 towns between Edo and Kyoto along the route.
Okay, I think Lance Gatling's question directly relates to that. He asked, was there any planning given to the numbers and intervals of Shuku-juku inns?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. I think well, they didn't want them too close together. I mean, it wouldn't have made a lot of sense. They tried to set them up about 8-10 kilometers apart, so that so it gave people options to how far they could travel. So to ease that, there is the one section where that's difficult is over Wada Pass, because Wada Pass, when you go over that, it's about 30 kilometers that there's no Juku. And so that was a very remote area. That would have been like 1 day's between Wada Juku and Shimo. It's like in the town when you go over Wada Pass and you come down on the lake there. That would have been the next Juku. So that was the longest stretch. Was that between those Juku, but that was because it was such a remote area. But typically they were 8 to 10 kilometers apart. I think the Japanese, it was Ryo. I believe that's the measure. It's about 10 kilometers. That was the Edo era measure. So, correct me if I'm wrong with that, but I think it was about 10 kilometers, that measure. So that seemed to have something to do with that distance.
One of the other pacing items was usually the fords for the river. People would, if you read accounts of people traveling, they would bunch up at the fords, and then particularly with inclement weather, would slow everything down, and then they kind of pool the Juku around such locations.
And Warabi Juku is a great example of that. Honjo is also was on at a major river, and that probably had an impact in making that the size that it was during the Edo era.
Yeah,
and as I mentioned, that was the biggest Juku of any Juku along the entire route.
Yep, I would believe that, because if the river rises, then the porters can't get across, or the
Yes.
ferries can't run, or they have to run very carefully. They have to operate very carefully, so everybody's piled up at the end drinking sake, waiting for the river to go down.
And in fact, to that point, it was said that that the Toyo the river at the Toda River, Todagawa at Warabi, that when it flooded, it was 4 kilometers wide. Yeah, so typically it was only 100 meters wide, but when it flooded, it was up to 4 kilometers wide. Yes, so that exactly, yes.
Yeah, and guess where the prostitutes collect today? At the truck stops.
What can I say?
There you go.
Michael Watson, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, I put a link to a handy list. But another point with the distance between it, because I'm a medievalist, so from Heian times and medieval times, the important messages going from particularly with medieval times with Kamakura and so on, and then later with Edo, is that if a message has to go fast, you have to change the horses. So you need places every now and then to have stable horses, and so you don't use the same horses. They would kill the horse.
I don't think there were a lot of use of horses. This is the
we're talking
people
about
traveled on
messages.
foot.
Yeah, imperial messages.
I believe that if you the trade and when you were sending goods, that went along the Tokaido. The Tokaido was a shorter and an easier route
Another
for that.
book, probably this is going to be upside down, but Shimazaki Tosan, I write the title, Yoake Mai. It's about the end of the Meiji period. That's set on Kisoji, and that is very much, it is set about families who, I'm sure you've heard of it, set on families who are actually managing, and their job is to make sure that people can pass and that the
Mm,
juku being taken care of. So that's a great classic for that. I
mm.
must say, I've got this book, I've had it for years, I still haven't finished it, but it's admired by many people as showing that sort of period of change.
That kind of how people that lived along the route in that,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And as I say, it's important to emphasize people travel this route on foot. This was everybody
Oh,
traveled on foot.
Speaking of, Celine asks, can you tell us about where you stayed along this route during your journey and
Oh,
what was it like?
that's an interesting question. Now, yes, the wonderful thing about Japan, this wonderful country is that you what I would do and because most of the route had train there were the train lines. You could you could like use the train lines to go back to a town or just I stayed at most of the way at business hotels, occasionally a ryokan. The one that I stayed at twice was a ryokan just before Wada Pass. That what wonderful people. They really and it's designed for Nakasendo hikers, Nakasendo walkers that were going to go over Wada Pass, and because it's 30 kilometers, and they would send you out with well equipped to handle the walk, and with lunch and bento and very lovely people. If you do walk the route, you go to through WADA, that you want to stay with those people. They take great care. They're very friendly and very knowledgeable and very into dedicated to serving Nakasendo walkers. But
Okay.
most of the time I stayed in business hotels.
Okay, couple of questions here, and that's about it. Tokyo asks, Yoko asks, are you an expert in history or architectural styles?
No, I'm by training, I'm an urban economist. So I'm an economist by training. I've been interested in cities all my life. So I love cities. I love architecture, and so I studied cities. Of course I was in the real estate business. I was in the real estate business active for more than 20 years in the commercial real estate business in Tokyo. So that's part of it, just architecture is just part of part of my life. So so when I started my Instagram channel, it was just very natural to do architectural photography. It was just one of the things that I've always wanted to do. In terms of history, certainly I I've always been interested in economic history. So you'll see there's certainly an economic history bent in my presentation,
Mm.
and architecture is history. Old buildings, that's history there. So then when you find out about it, you find out about the history of these places. And one of the wonderful things about doing the research in this country, Japanese people love to blog, and you can find like information that I found out about the families living in these buildings. It's just stuff that I got off of blogs, people walking through the neighborhood, talking to people, so you can get all that information. It's out there. And so that certainly helped me to give a real historical flavor. I mean, when you find out a family has lived in a home for 8 generations, it tells you the depth of these
Mm.
places. These are families and people that have lived there for hundreds of years in the same place. You know.
What an attraction.
Mm.
All right, our final question here is from David Burley, and he observes the roads were mainly for people or small amounts of goods, I imagine, and take it that large quantities were transported by ship around the archipelago. What was the balance, do you know?
Well, certainly would have had shipping. Of course, in Japan before Edo, you had the Seto Sea that was the main source of commerce in Japan. Um, Certainly would have gone up. I mean, it's a long way. My understanding is a lot of goods were shipped along the Tokaido. That you would have had a lot of trade that occurred, and a lot of goods were shipped. I've seen references
You can
in my research to goods being shipped, manufactured in Kyoto, and then say certain high quality goods, and they shipped it up to Edo, and they to get it up as quickly as possible.
in the picture
The,
of
um,
Hokkaido, there are lots of ships in the offing. You can see all the sails. I mean, there was obviously a lot going on.
Yeah, that hasn't been part. I'm not an expert on that, but
No, but just look at the famous
yeah.
pictures. I mean, I've noticed that there are lots of sails.
Most anything in bulk, particularly sake and any foodstuffs or shipping, building supplies went by
There,
ship.
there,
They couldn't carry it across the Nakasendo or the Tokaido. It's not possible. There are no bridges. All of that was intentional, and the ships were designed so they could only use a following fair following wind, so they could only make certain number of transits from Edo to Osaka area, like once a year. So you had to have a bunch of ships. You had to manage it. So you had warehouses. In fact, right where you guys live in Ryogoku, down in Sagacho. All the warehouses and stuff were right there, and they would come into the Tokyo and unload everything. So sake and everything. But it's a fascinating, for a maritime country. Nobody knows anything about the shipping history of Japan, which is really fascinating. Kirk Patterson, the former
sorry.
head of Temple U Japan, knows quite a bit about it.
Okay. I know Kirk. Yes, I know Kirk. Yes.
He may be able to fill that in. I've done a pretty good bit of research on it, and it's very, very strange. There's nothing like it in the world that I know of.
Lance, I've read. I read along the way. I've read instances where goods were that they rushed. I don't. There was talk about carrying it up the Tokaido. On some perishable goods.
Yeah, but it would be very high value small
That's
stuff.
exactly, yes, high value.
Like
yes.
Saffron, right?
Yes.
You couldn't carry bulk.
No, high value. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
But no, that's like gold or messages or things. And then
Yeah.
they had couriers almost like the Pony Express where they'd change horses. But the average slugs, a bunch of guys coming out of Osaka had to slog their way up. And it might take 3 weeks and it might take 3 months, depending on the weather and the physical abilities of the parties. But the trade, actually, monopoly was given to the bunch of guys. And I know this because the Kano family had a monopoly on the shipping the sake from the Kobe area, right? Nara sake, agari sake, sake. That went up to Edo, and they had to do it only certain times a year because they had square rig ships and they couldn't even sail against the wind. So they had to have like 3 times the number of ships that you would normally have to have because the ships just sat in port waiting for the monsoon winds to change so they could go back around. That was an intentional policy to limit the technology that the Japanese had mastered back in 1300s. So it's very strange.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. And like I say, Kirk, I think, knows quite a bit about this. He has actually circumnavigated Japan, recreating the old trade routes.
Okay.
Well, I'll be in touch with him and ask him if he wants to give us a presentation, okay? He's at Temple U.
Probably be better off not using my name.
We can talk about that, okay? All right, well, let's draw the formal part of this to a conclusion, and we can continue afterwards as long as we wish. But everybody, please give
Can I
John...
have one question?
Screech, yes.
Yeah. Or I better get my face up. Sorry. You were talking about those fire protection things on the buildings, Utsushi or something like that. I can't remember.
Oh, the usatsu, yes. The sleeves.
Yeah.
That's literally sleeves on the side. Those were both for, it's certainly decorative, but they were the initial purpose was for fire protection.
How did they protect from fire?
Because it would keep this fire from spreading. It was meant to stop, so at least make it more difficult for a fire. Obviously, if it's large and if it's too large, it's going to get, but it's going to make it more difficult for a building to catch on fire. And you'll see this, for example, especially further south in the Nakasendo, you'll see Edo era buildings where it has these usatsu, the sleeves. So you can see it was definitely a type of that construction existed long before the brick that you see here. You know, it's certainly other material because they didn't have brick then. But yeah, so it does. You'll see that in Edo era buildings, and it's quite lovely though. But they not only was it practical, but they certainly made them. They're beautiful. Yeah, they made them look beautiful.
Yes.
But yes, it is. Its purpose is fire protection.
It's literally a firewall.
Yeah, firewall.
Nice.
Yes.
And the extended wings would keep the cinders from blowing down the street. Because if you get a street level fire, you tend to get a vortex that drives the cinders and the fire down the street. That's what happened at Tokyo when the fire bombs came.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, can we all just give John a big round of applause for he did a lot of work to put this together.
Thank you.
Walked his little feet off.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're gonna end
My pleasure.
Thank you.